Hello, friends. What I want to tell you is that today we've decided to launch a new format. It's not exactly a review, it's more of a brainstorm session. Each and every single time we'll take our game and start throwing out new and exciting ideas. Today we cover the game Racing in Car 2021. This is one of our flagship titles.
It was mentioned that I have a biased perspective on it and that I don't really understand the project. Actually, that might really be the case. But I think that from the start, the product development strategy was based on the idea that we need to increase user engagement, at least the retention rate on day 3 or day 7, because our initial entry is good. Monetization on day 0 accounts for 50% of the revenue per user, and then there's a trailing effect, and by day 30, our retention rate is 2.5%. But the point is that adding various mechanics intended to bring users back, like collecting certain cards that unlock tuning options, or introducing a career mode, which we tried and which seemed quite logical, since essentially all competitors use some kind of level map to provide progression and unlock new cars and new modes for the player. None of that worked, unfortunately. And at this point, my hypothesis is that by choosing such a complicated path and preparing very complex, fairly large features, it takes a lot of time, but as a result, we often find ourselves with nothing to build player progression on. That is, we have about 12, at most 15 races per player on average. Our retention rate drops. All our monetization is based on ads shown between races, and we need to somehow, at least in my opinion, engage the user specifically in the core mechanic, since other mechanics and new tasks for the player haven't worked. Daily tasks didn't work, nor did the new modes where we offered players to drive in career mode, for example, to make a certain number of overtakes, or to stay on the track for a certain amount of time, or to reach checkpoints. None of that works. What works is the core mechanic, where players simply weave through traffic until their first collision. Accordingly, at this point, we want to release the career mode and just leave it, so to speak, as an addition to the existing mechanic without any progression, payment for this mode, and so on, simply so we don't throw away the feature. Additionally, we're rolling out a brand new TLE event where players can collect various valuable items on the track, and by doing so, they will be able to unlock a special car for their efforts, which, in a similar project that we conducted, actually showed pretty good and promising results, about a 5% increase in overall ad revenue. But there's a catch. After looking into the statistics a bit, we see that, on average, players unlock only 2 cars, no more. In other words, there's really no value for them in the cars. And there's no value in the currency either, it's in surplus. Players actively farm in-game currency while engaging in intense racing, but they hardly ever actually use it for anything significant. There's no value in tuning either. Only about 12 to 13% of players use tuning, which is upgrading the car. If we're talking about skins, only 7% of players even get to the skins. Basically, we have nothing to offer the player as a reward that would actually be valuable. That's why rewards immediately stop being a motivation for players to do anything. We need to add more fun, more kinds of entertainment. As of today, while we're rolling out the version, we're preparing a technical update, and in this technical update, we can throw in some features that are very easy to implement. At the very least, they're already in the project, so we can just add them to remote and test them out. But these features don't answer the bigger question of which direction we should be moving in. I think we need to move towards increasing user engagement specifically during the race itself, so that something is happening there. Maybe that means new modes. But again, new modes are already big features, and we need to, let's say, evaluate them properly, assess the costs for these features and what we get from them.
What is a TLE event?
Time-limited event. In other words, it's a time-limited activity for the user to earn some kind of reward. Actually, you need to complete about 10 races on average to get a new cool car. But as we can see, players usually play a couple of times and that's it. Nevertheless, this increases the total number of races by about 5 to 6%, which in turn raises ad revenue by 5 to 6% as well. We have interstitial ads between races.
What does the new car give you, besides the fact of owning it?
Nothing.
So the new car is basically just a skin, and in multiplayer everyone drives the same cars. I mean, essentially with the same engine.
We do have an update about multiplayer. Only 0.1% of races are in multiplayer, meaning 99.9% of races are offline. Multiplayer is available to us via subscription. This brings us about 20% of our IAP revenue. We don't want to give up the subscription, at least not on iOS. We could try it on Android, but at the moment, we're not focusing on multiplayer. For now, we don't know what to offer the player so that, aside from the bare mechanics, something else would engage them.
It seems that To start with, we just need to precisely define the overall direction in which this particular project should develop. Is it going to be, let's say, a truly creative and open-ended format where you have absolutely no specific objectives, you just leisurely drive around, thoroughly enjoying yourself, and various interesting events naturally happen to you? Or is it going to be the complete opposite way, where you have certain clear and distinct goals, a very clear progression, and we meticulously guide the player along that predetermined path? Have you tried progression? It's about the career mode as you described, and it didn't give you the expected growth. Maybe it's worth trying to go in the other direction then, to try to develop. If players just enjoy driving around, if they average about 12 races, maybe try to diversify the races themselves, that is, add some events on the road, some scripted incidents perhaps. In other words, diversify and make the driving process itself more interesting so that maybe each race lasts longer for the player. Perhaps reduce the traffic and make it more eventful. And in this way, we can increase the player's playtime or potentially improve other metrics.
Yes, I definitely support this option because for now it's unclear what to base the progression on and what to give the player in return, what the motivation is to complete something. Even as we're discussing a feature right now, I would like us to also talk about the user base we're targeting. If we start changing something with multiplayer now, the most we can...
By multiplayer, you mean the one that's open for free, where only about 20% of people actually go in?
Yes, that's on another project.
And on this one?
0.1%.
Right now, we want to work with what's already more or less in demand in our game. So if we try to build any activities around multiplayer now, it would be a very risky experiment. We have two options. We can work with the audience that's already somewhat engaged with the project, or we can try to engage new people. It's always harder to engage new people than to work with those who are already involved.
Max, can you tell us exactly what happened with your career? Because not all of our colleagues here understand. Yes, career mode is when we ran tests on the feature to see how it affected retention rate, playtime, and all the other metrics.
There were just several stages. The first stage was that, instead of the old racing mode, where you just drove aimlessly until the first crash, we offered the player a career mode instead. So we compared the step-by-step level progression with just a fun race. As a result, we saw a significant drop-off in users, and our retention rate fell by about 25% compared to the previous value. We then created an even easier balance. In other words, we simplified it even more, released it, and saw that making the balance easier didn't improve the situation at all. So they started completing levels a bit better, but nevertheless the user churn was still significant. We realized that we were doing it wrong, or rather we actually did it consciously. We were comparing the old mechanic with the new one, only to determine the balance. We decided that the balance should be super easy, and we added minimal progression through career mode so that after completing just the first career level, the player would already unlock the old ranking. We kept that mechanic alongside the career mode, but you still had to complete at least one level in the career. It was very easy for users, but nevertheless, we still saw a significant drop-off among users who had to complete at least one career level, about minus 17% retention rate compared to our standard default figures. So now, in theory, we just leave the career mode off to the side without requiring the player to complete it or unlock anything, because we don't see any engagement in progressing through the career.
Have you thought about diversifying the core mechanic? For example, you're driving and there's a token floating in the air, like money, for example. If you can pick it up, then for 15 seconds you switch to a motorcycle. So your car is replaced by a motorcycle, which is narrower, it's easier for it to maneuver between cars, it accelerates faster, and so on. Or, for example, you might encounter situations where you need to add ramps, or perhaps encounter various barriers that only leave 1 or 2 lanes open for traffic, or even experience cars falling from elevated bridges that you absolutely have to skillfully dodge, or something along those lines.
Unfortunately, we haven't tried anything like that. We've only tried implementing a nitro mechanic to somehow diversify the race itself. The mechanic worked out neutrally, but maybe the test was irrelevant. We can test this.
Nitro probably just makes things more complicated here.
Now you're suggesting hypotheses that I would actually really like to try testing. What Oleg was talking about, that theoretically we can spice up the race itself, add some activities along the way, so it's not just driving around and overtaking cars, but so there's a bit more interest in the race itself. Barriers, helicopters, bombs, ramps, all of that could be tried out.
This is a small boost, but it will be difficult to implement. Look, you tested the career mode irrelevantly because you can't run it at the same time as the main core mode, with free race and career together. Career mode is set aside. How is career mode different in racing games, especially in more advanced projects? In it, you can play separately but still earn rewards. These are resources that you can't earn in free race, and you're supposed to spend these resources on things like cars and upgrades. Right now, even the car upgrade system is very weak. As you correctly pointed out, the default car is much better than the other cars, especially in heavy traffic. More controllable. Right now, if you want to start and test the first tracks, you need to start with minimal balance, so there are fewer cars. Try to reduce it. So the tests need to be quick, micro tests to fine-tune engagement as much as possible. Plus, right now, without a career mode, you don't know how far you need to go. The tracks are very long and you don't know where the finish is. Even if you're going to add interstitials, you should try making the tracks shorter, right? Then by default, you'll have more interstitials per playtime. And the career mode is really more about variety, breaking away from someone, overtaking someone, arriving within a certain time, sometimes with no traffic, or on the contrary, with heavy traffic, and you get to try out different mechanics. And in career mode, you simply earn rewards. It's like you always have a short-term goal, because right now daily tasks don't motivate me at all as a player. Completing all 5 of them only earns you 7,500 coins. And what is 7,500 coins? Well, that's less than you can earn in a single race, which takes about 7 minutes, and the tasks there are so big that you really have to work to complete them. So even the reward for daily tasks in PT isn't motivating. It was also great in career mode, or it could work really well in multiplayer. When you start with a cool car, you show the player, you start the race, and you're driving the coolest car right from the start. After that, whether you win or lose, you get sent back, letting the player try out a cool car so they understand what they're aiming for. But as it is, the default car turns out to be much better than the ones you can buy. Even though those are a bit stronger in terms of stats, they're absolutely uncontrollable in all that traffic. And ramps, helicopters, like if we take Need for Speed No Limits as an example. That's cool, yeah, but in their game, you don't control it the same way. You move along 3 lanes, steering left or right, the car kind of snaps to the lane, and it works really well there, with slow-mo takeoffs. That kind of thing can only really work in creatives at best. But in the game, if there's already a certain balance and you add a helicopter somewhere, and imagine if you take this CPI driving approach, considering the costs and the impact, it's just not worth even spending time on it just to get a small boost where players might hit it on the track and take off somewhere. So here you just need to separate where on a free track you get one type of currency like coins, for example. In multiplayer you get coins and also some other currency that you can't get anywhere else, but then you can use it to upgrade certain parts or cars. And the third career mode where you can get both cars and some additional experience, right, which will unlock extra cars and so on. But right now all the cars are tied to coins, well, pretty much. And so it's clear for players, the motivation, the stats, they just drive around and want to try to earn as many coins as possible to buy a car. They won't be interested in anything else.
I genuinely think that there are quite a significant number of such problems present within the project, and they are all deeply interconnected with one another. And I feel that with targeted changes, like just tweaking the balance or just changing the traffic somehow, we won't really achieve much, and we need to make some big changes to see how exactly a major change affects the players. Because, for example, if we're talking about balance, right? Okay, we can tweak the balance so that players earn money faster, so they can buy cars more quickly, but a player who purchases several different cars won't really feel much of a difference, for example, in their overall experience. And if some cars are very similar to each other, like Zhenya said, they're basically just skins with slightly different sets of characteristics, right? And if we're talking about cars in the light game, these are cars that, as you said, are basically uncontrollable. So there's a problem with the cars. This problem also needs to be fixed. There's also a problem with the traffic. It doesn't suit fast cars. That's only natural because if you have incredibly dense traffic and you're driving a relatively slow car, you can still manage to get by somehow, but with a car that possesses high-speed capabilities, you truly need traffic that's much more sparse and open. So there's a problem with the meta and there's a problem with the core. So there are quite a lot of problems, and I think what needs to be done is to define some kind of idea, some big hypothesis that needs to be tested, and try to test this big hypothesis specifically, rather than making small changes, because I don't think small changes will lead to anything.
Trying to force a big hypothesis onto the current mechanics is, well, I think it's pointless, because right now there are even problems in the UI. For example, when you look at the speed, you can't even see where the players are going. You actually need to put numbers above them. So all these small improvements, these enhancements, they still need to be made, because you can't just take some cool feature like a tournament or something and plug it into the current system and expect some kind of course, you'll see that it doesn't work because, for example, you have a lot of drop-offs happening on the first day. and you're not doing anything about them, but instead you're trying to add a feature that only comes into play on the third or fourth day, which almost no one even reaches.
Yes, but on the other hand, these kinds of small changes don't really affect the bigger picture. That's why I think it needs to be done comprehensively. For example, if we're talking about a new mode, then we should essentially create a new mode, do the core part well, and at the same time carefully think through and properly implement the mechanics that are connected to this new mode. That is to track other players there, monitor traffic flow, and immediately add some good progression to this mode as well. To approach comprehensively.
But look, in racing games, progression is always great. It's about acquiring new cars. So why aren't cars working right now? Because they only differ visually. Plus, there's no multiplayer where you can show off your car, like, look, I have a Ferrari, I'm going to overtake everyone. How do they handle cars here? For example, there are A, B, and C classes. They separate them into those classes. And these classes aren't just visual, they can be upgraded more. For example, it's like with the heroes. Take Simon, you can upgrade him to 5 stars, right? With the Gore hero, you can upgrade him to 7 stars. So you can keep upgrading him even further. But with cars, a limit, you upgrade, that's all. Another thing is in career mode or something similar, you can only drive B or C class cars. So you can only participate in the cooler races with the top cars, where there are big tournaments. You can't use your default car, and these kinds of things add value to the cars, you know? So they're already valuable to the player by default because he feels like he'll be able to progress further with them.
But we don't have any of those modes that are tailored to a specific class, nor does upgrading cars really give the player any particular interest. They won't really notice much of a difference. Again, that's what I was talking about. These particular things really shouldn't be tested one by one, like, for example, carefully rebalancing the game mechanics or making the various cars distinctly different so they truly feel unique and special. Instead, you should probably try to do everything at once. That is, several features that will interact with each other and give some kind of...
You might draw the wrong conclusions like you added something. Say you add 3 features and one of them actually had a good effect, but together they had a negative impact. You look at the relevant metrics and then say, well, this particular update is truly bad, so let's roll it back immediately. Like if you know exactly what you're doing and the updates are shorter, for example, especially if they're at the beginning, then in general, 3 or 4 cohorts are enough. So basically you do these quick tests.
Oleg wants to say that there's a complex feature that will only have an effect when you implement it as a whole, not in parts.
If you do it in pieces, it won't work.
Max, did you ever do events like for distance, for speed, who can finish faster, or with gear shifting, I don't know, based on distance or timing? Did you implement events that...
Not events, but in the career mode we had levels. For example, a level objective could be to overtake several cars in a row, or simply achieve a certain number of overtakes, or reach a checkpoint with a different number of checkpoints. The more checkpoints there are, for example more than 2, the higher the dropout rate. In other words, players generally react poorly to specific tasks or objectives. For them, as I see it, it's just a simple game to jump into for 2 minutes, get distracted, do a few quick races, and leave. So maybe we could boost interest with some new modes or something like that, make it more impressive, but that's expensive to develop. As for small changes, honestly, we haven't really tried much. Right now we have a list of minor changes, like testing a rebalance of car prices. On a similar project, we lowered the prices of the first 10 cars, and that increased the retention rate, which in turn brought in about 5 to 7% more ad revenue. On our project, that's significant.
But wouldn't it make more sense to first create value for these cars for the player and only then work on balancing their prices?
That's right. How?
I'm more inclined toward Vasily's approach. I think we should start by making small tweaks to what we already have, because it's clear that what we have now needs tuning, as was already mentioned, regarding UI/UX and certain aspects of the race itself, the interface, and so on. And regarding how to create value for the player in the car, well, look, I think, in my mind at least, that if you think about what gives you an advantage in this game, it's acceleration. How much acceleration you have, how quickly you accelerate, how fast you can brake, and your physical size. The smaller you are, the more advantageous it is for you. So maybe by using these 3 parameters or maybe some others, well, in this game, maximum speed actually gives you a debuff instead. In other words, it's actually worse for you if you can accelerate too much. So maybe by using these 3 parameters I mentioned, mentioned, and maybe some others I haven't thought of. You could try to create value for the player with them. So maybe you could debuff the starting car a little, make it accelerate more slowly, so that when the player buys the next one, they can floor it, and it accelerates sharply, for example. But at the same time, it also stops faster if needed. So in this way, even just with the first car, I think the player will already become well, you could make the first car a big step, and then after that, add a little bit at a time, maybe even make the car body smaller. So for example, you could potentially start with something like a very compact zip car, or a nimble gazelle, or even a standard bus, and ultimately end up with a sleek, small sports car that's not particularly wide and can easily squeeze through congested traffic more effortlessly, so to speak. In other words, tuning what you have, trying to create value for the cars, for the player, and then I would try A/B testing some of the things I mentioned for the core. What Vasya mentioned about diversifying with different currencies in different modes and maybe trying to sell cars for different currencies, I think it's worth starting by first showing the player the value, explaining why they need it.